So I was thinking that I could start my talk with a call and response. So call and response is a structure where I say something and you say something back to me. So here we go. It's so over. It's so over. We're so back. All right. You guys have been in crypto for a while, so you know about this cycle. This is a Gitcoin cycle. So I started Gitcoin in 2017 in my basement and was lucky enough to get it funded by Consensus. And that was my first it's so over to we're so back cycle. Gitcoin in the beginning was a bounty platform, and we partnered with Bounty's network and Consensus to work with some of the top projects in the ecosystem. And it was the first time that I was able to go full-time working on something that I loved. But it was not to be. Bounties were not a sustainable business model for us, as ETH went from $1,400 down to $80 in 2018. That was our next it's so over moment. But then we discovered the Quadratic funding paper by Glenn Weil and Vitalik Buterin, and then Quadratic funding was just kind of like a rocket ship for Gitcoin and brought it into a prominent place where Vitalik Buterin was blogging about us, and we were funding Uniswap and Urine Finance. And wow, we were so back when we discovered Quadratic funding. But then we raised some money, we left Consensus, and we launched a DAO. And in the dregs of the 2022 to 2023 cycle, we found another it's so over moment for Gitcoin. That was the Gitcoin 2.0 era, when we naively and I think somewhat optimistically launched a DAO, thinking that we could fund public goods using our treasury. And we had another we're so back moment when we raised millions of dollars in dog coins in order to fund public goods. That was an era through history. But I think that all in all, the 2.0 era of Gitcoin didn't work out because our primary platform, which was a Quadratic funding platform, didn't get as much adoption that we wanted to see in the market. And in March of this year, we decided to wind down Grant Stack and Grants Lab, which was our primary business unit at that time. And that was an it's so over moment for me. And so right now I am standing in front of you after GG24, which is our first Gitcoin 3.0 style round. And we're trying to engineer a we're so back moment for Gitcoin. And that's what my talk is about today, is where I think Gitcoin's going to be going. So the title of my talk about Gitcoin 3.0 is Solving Alignment with Ethereum. I'm going to talk about alignment issues as they exist in the world. A typical alignment problem that Gitcoin's historically been involved in is funding open source software and public goods funding. But there's other alignment issues out there, things like how do we align principal and agent? How do we align capital and labor? And the one that's, I think, in the contemporary environment had a lot more heat in the media right now is AI misalignment. How do we make sure that these super intelligences that we're summoning are aligned to us? And I think this is probably the biggest impact that Gitcoin can have on the world, is if we can solve that. So basically, the arc of my talk is the problem of alignment. What does it look like game theoretically a priori? And then the solution. I think Ethereum is a game-changing technology. And then I want to talk about how I think Gitcoin can be an accelerator for solving alignment problems. So let's dive right into it. Okay, so a particularly persnickety type of alignment problem is what's called a multipolar trap. A multipolar trap is any incentive system in a political economy, in an economy in which individual incentives, rationally individual incentives, will lead to a collectively disastrous outcome. So what you're seeing on the slides right here is a design space. And basically, this design space has been simplified into like a 3D mesh in which the higher you go on the model, the better the outcome is for humanity, for the people who are in the design space. And the lower you go, the worse it is. So basically, this is just a way of visualizing what a multipolar trap is, which again is just individual incentives that are leading to collectively disastrous outcomes. And the reason that we're focused on multipolar traps at the beginning of this talk is that it's actually one of the most persnickety issues that exist out there in the world today. So climate change, you can actually conceive of as a multipolar trap. One of the biggest existential risks that exists today is that individuals have a rational economic incentive to emit carbon, to go about their day-to-day movements in an economic, support their family, participate in the economy, but that emits carbon, it has an externality, and that leads to the collectively disastrous outcome of climate change. Open source software is a special public goods funding / misalignment problem that I think Gitcoin has historically evolved around. And it also is a multipolar trap where individuals use open source software, but they don't actually support the maintainers. And that leads to a collectively disastrous outcome wherein we don't have stable infrastructure for our digital world. Open source software creates $500 billion per year in economic value, and the people who are working on it can't actually even get paid or support their family because they are stuck in the multipolar trap. And then the contemporary problem that everyone keeps talking about is AGI alignment. What's going to happen when we summon these like techno capital gods that live in the cloud and they're not aligned with humanity? And there's this AI arms race that's happening right now where each lab is racing ahead to develop AI and isn't able to actually align it with humanity because they don't have the time and resources in order to do that. Because if they do, then they're going to lose the multipolar trap. The race between the US and China, or the race between OpenAI and Anthropic, could be framed as a multipolar trap. So multipolar traps, would suffice to say, are a thing that I care a lot about, and it's something that I've been thinking about. And I think that the reasons that we haven't been able to solve multipolar traps in the past is that you can't expect individuals to actually opt out of the trap, because if they don't take their individually rational, selfish action, then they are going to, that humanity still falls into the trap because we don't have a way of coordinating to keep people out of the collective action problem together. So basically, if I were to opt out of participating in the economy and not creating a carbon externality, well, the globe is still going to warm unless I can convince all the other 6 billion people on the planet to not fall into that trap and in the future. So there's not a good way to coordinate people to get out of the trap because you can't coordinate that collective action to happen at scale. And governments, which are supposed to be the vehicle for keeping us out of the multipolar trap, are not effective at doing so. So theoretically, if you had a democratic government that reflects the will of the people and it's able to enforce sanctions on people who are doing things that are collectively disastrous for humanity, then yeah, you could keep people out of the multipolar trap. But governments have a jurisdiction, and outside of that jurisdiction, they can't enforce it. They're also really bad at enforcing that jurisdiction, and sometimes they get captured by special interests and by elites that want to use the government to enact their will instead of the will of the people. So this has been a really hard problem to solve, and I think that it's, as humanity has increased its complexity, a problem that we haven't been able to solve. And I think that Ethereum is sort of a new hope for solving these kinds of collective action problems in the 21st century. So what if we could build new incentive systems that actually solve multipolar traps by creating an environment that creates outcomes that are better for the collective and sort of incentivize better actions that lead to better outcomes for the collective. And I think that this is perhaps Ethereum's highest purpose. So they say that in crypto, you either get in it for the money, or you get in it for the tech, or you get it in for the coordination. And so I think this is the where I've landed, is that we can coordinate to get out of these problems. So let's go into the second part of the talk about Ethereum as a game-changing technology. I want to say that these ideas, for me, come from Virgil Griffith. This is a post that he wrote in 2019 entitled "Ethereum is a Game-Changing Technology," literally. And basically, he's making the point that you can augment incentives with Ethereum, and you can engineer multipolar traps. The example that he gives in his blog post right here is a prisoner's dilemma, which is sort of a toy example of a multipolar trap. You can augment the incentives of prisoner's dilemma or multipolar trap type systems such that you make more rational. You change the incentives such that the individual action leads less to collective disastrous outcomes, and you do that by sanctioning rational behavior, adding a cost to it to take the defect coordinate, or you add a bonus to the coordinate square in the prisoner's dilemma. So these are not my ideas. These are ideas from Virgil Griffith, and I think that if I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, then I think Virgil is one of those. So basically, the idea here is that we can build new incentive systems where we subsidize individually rational incentives that are good for the collective, and we sanction things that are not good for the collective. And so I think that the opportunity here is to build a system for coordinating humanity that isn't subject to the problems that governments in the nation state in the industrial era have. So not capturable, don't have limits on their jurisdiction, the transparency issues that happen with 20th century governments. Now we can build networks which are basically a substance that permeates all around us, and we can build incentive systems that are programmed into the ether, pun intended, in order to solve these multipolar trap problems. So just to play back the example that I started with at the beginning, open source software, you've got a problem with open source software where the individual maintainers are not able to pay their rent or feed their family, even though they are going to be even though they're creating billions of dollars in economic value. And so if you can build a new incentive system into open source software that actually pays the maintainers and gets them rewarded for their work relative to the impact that they're having, then I think you can solve that problem. The example that I've got up here is quadratic funding. Quadratic funding is a capital allocation mechanism where you reward projects on the basis of how democratically popular they are among the populace. There's other ways to solve this problem. I think deep funding and retro funding are other great examples of how you solve this. And the thing I'll call out about Ethereum that I think is incredibly powerful is that there are more than one group or entity that are working on this problem. So obviously Gitcoin is here. We're hosting this conference. We're hosting all of you. But Gitcoin is not the only project out there that's working on this. So ClearFund is working on this. Giveth is working on this. Deep Funding is working on this. And I think that that's one of the incredible things about Ethereum is that you can stack multiple of these systems on top of each other in order to solve the problem of open source funding. So basically, Gitcoin creating a quadratic funding layer on top of the open source funding problem, and then Optimism creating a retro funding layer on top of it, Gesundheit. And the deep funding all together are like a stacked incentive landscape, and all together they create a stronger incentive landscape for solving that misalignment problem. And there's a nice plurality of mechanisms and incentive landscapes, a diversity of mechanisms and of funding sources that are able to actually all together be stronger than were ever before. And this is a fundamentally uncapturable system because you've got a plurality of mechanisms and funding sources that have never been possible before. So one of the things that we're celebrating at Gitcoin is the pluralism of the Ethereum space. So this is this graph can seem like a lot to look at when you first look at it, but basically the x-axis is time, so 2018 to 2019, and then the y-axis is how experimental is the funding source that is funding public goods in the Ethereum space. And then all of these different little colors here are different funding sources that are funding the commons, funding public goods, funding open source software in Ethereum. And we've got a poster out front. The poster is entitled Pluralism is Punk. And basically you can pick up a copy of this graph, which we minted in order to celebrate the pluralism of all the different ways of funding the commons in the Ethereum space. So it started off with the Ethereum Foundation, funding open source software in the ecosystem. And then in 2019, you start to see things like Gitcoin and Moloch DAO come around and coordinate funding and alignment for the commons. And then in more contemporary space, you can see things like Glow Dollar or Gardens or Gitcoin V3 or Octant, and all of these projects that we know and love that are helping to solve this misalignment problem of open source software. And I used to think that this pluralism was just an accident. It was just sort of like something that had accidentally accidentally happened. But now more and more, I think that Ethereum is a space where pluralism can flourish because Ethereum was built for it. We've got client diversity at the bottom of the stack. There's multiple execution layer and consensus clients in the Ethereum space. And I think it's just such a beautiful thing that the Ethereum space is not dependent on any one client in order to keep the network secure. And wouldn't it be a beautiful thing if we had this anti-monopoly, pro-pluralism methodology all up and down the stack of the economy? I think that would be better for citizens and for consumers if we had anti-capture baked up and down the stack. And so this idea of practical pluralism, the pluralism of the public goods funding in the Ethereum space, I think is one of the beautiful things that I see out there. And the idea that we can stack these incentive mechanisms on top of the alignment problems gives me a lot of hope for humanity in the 21st century, because we can be stronger together in solving these problems. And I also think that, in some ways, creating more alignment in the world in the 21st century as we transition from the industrial age to the information age this is kind of our Apollo program. This is our Moonshot to take us from the status quo future in which we've got all these different misalignment problems into a different but still plausible future in which we've actually solved misalignment. And I think that that's, to me, why Ethereum is a game-changing technology. We can solve these alignment problems, and we can go from it's so over to we're so back. And so that gets me really excited about Gitcoin 3.3. So basically, we've shut down the Quadratic funding platform at Gitcoin as of Q2 of this year, and now I'm just so pilled on pluralism, on advancing the cause of alignment in the 21st century, and then also basically recognizing that there's many amazing projects out here who are trying to solve alignment problems and helping to elevate them. So Gitcoin Grants 24 was Gitcoin's first Gitcoin 3.0 era round, and I think that the amazing thing about Gitcoin Grants 24 is that we had between 6 and 8 different capital allocation mechanisms that we elevated from the community out there. So basically working with Giveth on quadratic funding and Privote on private quadratic funding, Gardens doing conviction voting, and we've got a plurality of quadratic funding, a plurality of funding platforms that we're now embracing. And so I think that one of the things that Gitcoin can really serve is that we've got a treasury and we've got distribution for these mechanisms. And so if we could configure Gitcoin as an accelerator of this alignment in the Ethereum space, as opposed to just sort of one of the funding mechanisms in the arena, then I think that that's an area that we could go that I think would be really, really something that I could be excited about, because it's natively pluralism pilled. We can accelerate all of the different beautiful mechanisms that are happening out there, and I think there's an opportunity for us to accelerate this vision of Ethereum as a game-changing technology if we're able to do that. So that's I think where we're going with Gitcoin 3.0. Gitcoin 3.0 was GG24. Where we are now, I consider that to be Gitcoin 3.0. And then Gitcoin 3.3 is, I think, where we're going, which is a future in which we're funding public goods and funding alignment, but in a plural way. And I think that that's the direction that we're going, is that we'll be solving public goods problems and solving these problems. But I think that leaves unanswered the question of how do we actually make money and sustain ourselves. And so the answer to that, I think we've got hints of that, but I don't think that we've completely figured that out yet. OSO and Carl Curvone from OSO has helped us out with an analysis that showed that in the 2021 cycle, we were able to fund a bunch of projects in the DeFi space and up-and-coming projects in the Ethereum ecosystem, and we'd be up on the order of 20x to 200x, depending on what pre-assumptions you make about that that funding campaign, because we funded Uniswap and we funded Urine Finance and we funded 1inch Exchange. If we had taken actual equity upside in those projects instead of just funding them, then we would be up by a significant amount. And so, what if in the future, instead of just Gitcoin funding public goods and funding alignment, we were actually to take equity upside in the projects that we fund? And So I think that, like a typical campaign, maybe what we'll do for GG25 is if we're going to deploy $1 million to funding what matters to funding alignment in the Ethereum ecosystem, maybe what we could do is we could take half of that and just, fund public goods like we always have, and then let the cream of those projects rise to the top, and then take equity investments in the projects that come through Gitcoin. So Gitcoin's unfair competitive advantage, I believe, is that we find the cool stuff before everyone else because we're funding what matters in the Ethereum ecosystem. And so if we figure out what the frontier metas are and we actually fund them, then I think that that's going to ensure longevity for Gitcoin, and hopefully we'll create this flywheel where we're doing good for the world and the world does good for us through that. So I think that's a little bit of where Gitcoin is going. If you want to get involved, then I would love to work with you. If you're an investor who wants to get in on that deal flow, please come find me. If you are a mechanism designer or a developer who's building public goods funding, capital allocation, alignment, acceleration software, then I'd love to talk to you. And if you're an alignment enjoyer and you just want to nerd out on these concepts, then please come find me as well. Today we are releasing an alpha preview of the Gitcoin 3.3 Rainbow paper, and the title of the Rainbow paper is Accelerating Alignment with Ethereum and AI. And I think that this could be a quite promising direction for Gitcoin and Ethereum to be going to. So we've got a pile of these rainbow papers up here at the front, and then we'll also have them being distributed at the swag area in the front of Shelling Point. And pick up a copy, tell me what you think, and looking forward to discussing the future with you for the rest of Shelling Point. If you want to come find me, we're going to be doing a workshop upstairs in which we talk about the actual technology behind Gitcoin 3.3, and myself and John Bowe will be up in the workshop room talking about how we make it happen. So looking forward to the discussion. Thanks for having me, Shelling Point, and I'll see you out there.
Time for Q&A? Yeah, let's see, Romy. So if you have more time, you want to go.
Okay, I've just been informed we have time for Q&A. So if anyone has a question, let me know. No questions. Okay, there we go. Right up there.
I saw one of the last rounds that Gitcoin did was that was super cool. And I might have missed this, but did Gitcoin plan to bring back like typical red funding front end wrap as well, or are you kind of moving this to
Yeah, so the question was, we just did a quadratic funding round with Giveth, and that was quite a great collaboration. And then the question was, are we going to continue working with Giveth, or are we going to build our own funding protocol? Yeah. Yeah, I think we don't really know yet. I think that we're still doing a retrospective on how GG24 went. And the one thing I will say is that I really love Griff and I go way back, and we've been friends for a while, and we've always been looking for a way to work together. So it's been really fun working with Giveth, but I think that we don't want to be committed to any specific one provider. It would be great if we could build like one unified front end where you could contribute to all the different campaigns in one place, but no plans to do that are currently on the roadmap. So we'll see. GG25 is going to be in March, so I think that we'll know probably around January or February what the plan is there. Thank you. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, but like I said, I'm a big believer in this pluralism of the space, and the diversity of the mechanisms and the funding sources, I think, is a really powerful thing. And so if we can keep aggregating and accelerating and banding together, then it'll lead for better outcomes for everyone. Any other questions? Go ahead.
You framework give one easier scenario where you also take politics for projects.
Yep.
keeping this? Because we're trying to work in Gitcoin that years ago, for sure you remember. But part of the problems was that
we give an incentive basically to the donors to our token, and that was violating the terms.
Okay. Yeah, so the question is, are you going to take token upside or equity upside? And then also, what about the quid pro quo? Was that the question? Okay, so yeah, quadratic funding has this property where if projects are giving out a quid pro quo, benefit to their donors, then it sort of violates the rules for of quadratic funding. So yeah, I mean, I think that the answer to your question is yes. I think token upside is a good thing, and we'll explore that. And then within the quadratic funding round, I think that we'll probably still have a no kickbacks rule, in which you can't give kickbacks to the donors, at least not within the round. But then after the round, Gitcoin actually having a treasury that invests into the projects could be like a Gitcoin to project relationship that doesn't violate that quid pro quo relationship. But yeah, it's maybe a nuanced thing to communicate, and I'm realizing that right as you're asking me this question. So I'll have to think a little bit about how to communicate that clearly, such that it's not something that's confusing to people. So good call out. Thank you. Go ahead.
First of all, I think the 3, is like really clever. Thanks. Question would be, are you taking more inspiration from governments, like how they did DARPA, or is it the best in early stage technology, getting equity back, or more like venture capital?
Yeah. So the question was, are we taking more inspiration from DARPA or venture capital for Gitcoin 3.3? And yeah, thank you for the comment on Gitcoin 3.3. We're having a little bit of fun with the memes there. For those of you who don't know, 3.3 is code for the space in the prisoner's dilemma game, where both of the players decide to coordinate instead of defect. And so we're just having a little bit of fun with the version number of Gitcoin there. Yeah, I mean, I think, like, are we going to be more like DARPA, or are we going to be more like a venture capital firm? I think that my answer to that is that we're going to be a third thing that's not on that map. And, you know, like DARPA, I think, is really incredible for creating the internet and a bunch of other technologies. But, you know, if we had the treasury weight in the funding of the U.S. government, then we could make that much of a moonshot. And so I don't think it's quite DARPA, but I think that if we're gonna like take inspiration from venture capital, we're definitely more public goods pilled than venture capital. So I think that we're like a third thing in between those two poles. So I don't know, but we'll discover it over time, and I think the action will be in the Gitcoin governance forums as we figure that out. All right, I'm told that we're out of time. Thanks so much. Grab a copy of the Rainbow paper here or at the swag group or at the swag station up front. And I'll pass it back to our great and fabulous and amazing and handsome moderator, Adam Wozni.